Today we're going to talk about the rudiment, the single drag, also known as the ruff. Okay, the single drag, with the way we set up for this rudiment, is basically identical to how we set up for a flam. Because what a single drag is a main stroke played with one hand and some grace notes played with the other hand immediately before the main stroke. And I did use the plural term grace notes because normally when we're playing a flam, it's singular, it's just one note. And that's this, one little grace note. But on a single drag, we're going to actually play two grace notes. The way we achieve the sound and the feel of a single drag is by letting these two small grace notes bounce. It's just like a little low relaxed diddle or double stroke. But we have to generate the energy needed to make the stick bounce from a low height. We don't want to have to come from a 12-inch or 9-inch height way up here. We got to be able to generate whatever speed we might need, whatever would be appropriate for these grace notes, depending on our tempo and our context and the style we're playing. You got to be able to generate that from a little low place. The way we achieve the controlled low bounce of the two grace notes comes from squeezing the stick after the second stroke has happened. We've got a bounce where I have to let my fingers be open. You're going to notice that my fingers close up like this and close the back of the stick against the palm of my hand after the second grace note. There it is. My fingers are kind of relaxed and open on the first thing, and then I close them. Open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, to arrest the motion of the stick. Because it's all happening from pretty much within my palm. It's a lot of fingers. There's maybe a little bit of wrist being used to generate some kinetic energy, some motion for the stick there. But I'm just going bounce, bounce, and a main stroke. Let's actually practice that little motion of playing two low bounced grace notes. Pick either hand that you prefer and practice just what that feels like. Get enough energy to create a bounce, even though you're low, and then arrest that stick. Once you feel comfortable playing a little low diddle or little low double stroke, try dropping the main stroke in after it. We aren't worried about what we're prepping for because we're taking these as individual little drags. You could prep for another one. Then try with the other hand. Practice the little grace notes. Play them tight and play them a little more open. I would start by making them open and then arrest the stick and then drop in the main stroke after it. Work with the amount of pressure that you apply here at the fulcrum and how quickly you close up your back fingers. Work with that. Make adjustments there to allow yourself to make the two grace notes sound more open, further apart from one another, or more closed. If you apply a little more pressure and a little more speed with closing your back fingers, you get a tighter interpretation, a more closed interpretation of the grace notes. Give that a shot. Now, if I'm going to be playing several right hand drags in a row, just as we've talked about with the flam in the past, my right hand is going to play a bunch of full strokes. It's going to do this, and my left hand is going to stay low and just play several low double stroke, double taps, two little grace notes. So it would go. My right hand is always coming back up. Or my left hand, if my left hand was playing left drags, my main stroke was with my left. My right hand's playing the low notes. But if I'm alternating flams, which is the way I want you guys to spend most of your time practicing them, I've got to play my main stroke as a downstroke, and after I play my two little doubles, my little low double grace notes, I got to play the second one like it's an upstroke, so that I'm set now to play a drag with the other hand. So bounce, bounce, note, and I'm bringing this one up, and then bounce, bounce, note, bounce, bounce, note, bounce, bounce, note. It's very important to initiate those grace notes from a low place. Now, the single drag is, as I've mentioned, is also known as the Ruff, and that's because I think there was an idea somewhere when the rudiment was named that sort of mimicked the sound that the drum or the sticks were making on the drum. Excuse me. That sounded like ruff, 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 ruff. If you kind of roll the R and ruff a little bit, you get sort of a ruff. And it's spelled R-U-F-F. And that's the older name for it. People still use that term. The more modern name in the last few decades that we use for it is the single drag. It's worth noting that the single drag can be played with several different interpretations for how spaced apart the grace notes are. As is always the case with grace notes connected to then a main stroke, you want the thing to sound like one event is a term that I love to use. It's one event, regardless of how many strokes it is. So a flam, two strokes, but one event. One event, one event, one event, even though it's two strokes. The same thing's true for a single drag. It's three strokes, two small ones and one big one, but it needs to sound like one thing, one event. You don't ever want it to be so open that it sort of seems like three separate events. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That drag would not really be considered a drag in most contexts. That feels like three separate notes that have their own time associated with each of them. So it's okay for the drag to be more open sometimes. And then to gradually close up and tighten up the grace notes. Slightly tighter. I'm going to keep the distance between my main events the same, but I'm going to tighten up the grace notes. Here's open grace notes. It's about as open as you would ever want it to be. Now, without changing tempo, I'm going to tighten the grace notes up. So it's just a stricter, tighter interpretation. And you can explore the range of openness or closedness in those grace notes from one end to the other end. There are even some contexts, although it's fairly rare for this interpretation to be used that much anymore. But occasionally you can tighten up a drag so much that the grace notes even sound buzzed. I had one of those that was actually a little open. But most of the time when you see a drag written, what you want to do is really be articulating two distinct grace notes. Even if it's super tight, there's still exactly three strokes in there, two grace notes and one main stroke. So when we're alternating our drags, we're prepping the other hand. As we play one drag, we're prepping for the next one. And articulating them however the music and our own artistic sensibilities seem to suggest that we should, or as our instructors maybe suggest we should. When you're playing the drag from slow to fast to slow, as you would any rudiment, you want to probably start with a more open interpretation of the grace notes as the main events are further apart. And then as you bring your main events closer and closer together, also tighten up the grace notes. And then you'll kind of reach critical mass, kind of your saturation point of tightness. That's about it for me. Now I'm just going to bring the main events together more and more without the stick clicking, hopefully. Now I'm going to open the grace notes up a little bit more. As I slow the main events back down, I will open the grace notes up just to demonstrate the ability to explore a range of interpretations along with a range of speeds of being able to execute the rudiment. Some people would say that you should stick with one interpretation for a presentation, that if you're going to play them tight, you should keep them tight, even when the events are slow and further apart from one another. And then you maintain that exact interpretation all the way through as you get faster and faster. But I really like to see students be able to articulate evenly and with the same musical control a difference in interpretation of the grace note as they speed up the rudiment, when they're doing the very specific activity of presenting it from slow to fast to slow. I like to see the grace notes change just a little bit, go from more open to tighter as the rudiment gets faster. That's it. Single drags, also known as the Ruff. Practice them. Practice right hands, and then practice left hands, and then practice alternating sticking.